I'm Kristy Duncan, and I'm delighted to be chatting today with Sebastien Delasnerie, Managing Director and Head of Commercial Cards for North America at Citi, as well as Trudy Curtis, who's Managing Director and Head of Commercial Cards for EMEA at Citi, joining us from London. Welcome, Sebastien and Trudy.
Thanks, Kristy. Happy to be here.
Yeah, ditto.
Awesome. This month, being now March, we are framing the discussion to include the theme of Break the Bias to celebrate International Women's Day. Today, we'll be talking about becoming an ally. So, Trudy and Sebastien, before we dive in, can you just start by telling the audience what your background is and what your roles are at Citi? Trudy, do you want to start us off?
Okay, sure. So my background, actually, I've spent my entire working career at Citi. I've worked in various different functions, so operations, implementation, sales, and currently I'm in managing a business kind of role. So literally my whole career has been at Citi. I have moved around different locations, and I've basically been working up the chain, let's say, to my current role.
Awesome. And tell us what you're doing now at Citi.
So my current role, I'm leading the commercial cards business in EMEA. So I'm responsible for pretty much end-to-end the business.
Sebastien, I want to hear what you're up to, and just remind the audience, which I forgot to do earlier, that you're based in New York, I believe?
I am based in New York. I actually have a very similar background to Trudy. I've had my entire career with Citi, 24 years, and also different roles in different countries. I started in Paris in relationship banking, then move around to fixed income, trade, and eventually commercial cards. And just like Trudy, I am also responsible for the business for the North American region, so end to end, and focusing on growing the business and supporting the global franchise.
Wow, two fantastic roles. I'm really jealous. They sound like a lot of fun and very interesting. Clearly interesting enough to keep you engaged at Citi for many years. That's fantastic. So jumping to today's theme about bias, Sebastien, why don't you start? I'd like to see if we can just define what is gender bias in the workplace.
So, Kristy, in my mind, gender bias is defined as a differentiation of managing an organization and individuals in that organization based on their gender, right? And the reality is that gender should not be a factor when managing a business and managing a team and managing talent, right? So gender bias, whether conscious or unconscious, right, is going to create this differentiation of appreciation for one's abilities, for one's performance based on gender, and that differentiation is going to translate into differences in managing a career, in providing advice, in providing support, in providing compensation, right? And so that eventually leads to negative impact on obviously individual career path, individual participation to a business, and at the end of the day, the overall performance of the team.
Yeah, great way to define that. Trudy, would you add anything?
No, very good description. I think it's important as well to say that obviously the gender bias can go both ways. So to me, gender bias is literally favoring a particular gender. And we're here as women in payments today, so we're sort of assuming that the conversation is about favoritism perhaps to men, but actually it can go both ways. So as Sebastien put it, it's that bias, or unconscious or not, that differentiates the way that we treat our employees and our team, but it could be both ways, male or female.
Always great to have two perspectives on this. Thank you for that. So do we think gender bias is experienced equally by everyone? Any thoughts there?
Probably not equally right now. Actually, I would say from my experience that any experience of gender bias is decreasing over the years anyway, for sure. But in advance of this, I polled a few of my female colleagues and asked them whether they experienced gender bias. And I was quite surprised. There were vehement responses that no, they do not experience gender bias at all, which is great. Either I picked a small subset of individuals that don't truly reflect the general population, or I think we're doing a better job and there's less gender bias now than there was in the past.
Oh, that's great.
And I think to that point, right, just to add to what Trudy just said, having been with Citi for 24 years, right, you see the evolution, right, and certainly I would say that the situation with gender bias has improved over time, right? And I think part of it is also a question of generations, right? The generation of younger professionals, right? They come in with a higher awareness and sensitivity to gender bias, right? There's also all the infrastructure that institutions like Citi have put in place in terms of training, in terms of raising awareness, that's addressing maybe the more obvious expression of gender bias. So all this has created a more gender neutral environment. But I think it's also fair to say that gender bias still exists, right? That it tends to be more directed at women than men, and that we cannot be complacent, and that we as managers need to make sure that we continue to raise awareness and address it proactively, right? To continue to bring to bring that bias down, because it's here, and unfortunately probably will continue for foreseeable future. So it really requires leadership, right, to continue to address it.
That's a great segue, Sebastien, into my next question. Thank you for that. So you're both leaders at really big, fantastic teams at Citi. What do you think leaders can do to help to break this bias? Trudy, do you want to start?
I'll start. I think clearly we need to lead by example. I think it's great that we have more and more senior ladies in senior positions already, because I think that helps in a way. Because one can become a role model. But as a leader, I think it's important to definitely engender within your own team and your own sphere of influence this complete meritocracy approach. I find that I'm mentoring quite a few ladies, but I also mentor men as well. And I think just probably trying to encourage women particularly to promote themselves. What I can advocate for them, but they need to advocate for themselves as well, and have a bit more confidence, and particularly maybe in the area of applying for jobs. That's something where I'm always trying to encourage ladies to go for more stretch assignments than they perhaps would otherwise do, just so that you can increase the number of women in more senior positions. So I think those are some of the things that we can do. Sebastien, you probably have more ideas.
So Trudy is 100% right? We need to lead by example, because the example we set strikes a tone throughout the organization, and that's obviously critical, right? What we need to do as well is to proactively reach out to all team members, right? In this particular instance, be extra sensitive to our female colleagues, right? Who may, just like other male colleagues, be reluctant to be part of a conversation, be part of a project, and make sure that we involve them proactively, not just wait on them to raise their hand, but also involve them proactively in the conversation, involve them proactively in career development discussion, and create this effectively gender neutral engagement environment where everybody feels comfortable raising their hand and say, I'm ready for more. I need to have a conversation about my next step, or, I'm not ready. I need to something different, right, to continue to grow.
All really, really great points. I love this setting the tone, leading by example, tapping women on the shoulder and saying, I think you're ready for this next move, or let's have that discussion and see, what opportunities might be available to you. But I think Trudy's point about promoting themselves, women typically don't do that enough. We're good at sitting in the corner and doing a really good job, not so good at telling other people about how that project went well, or the successes that we have achieved, so that we can get some profile to help us get to that next level. I want to ask you both another question, which I think will be of interest to our audience. And For women in the audience who might be experiencing gender bias, what advice would you give to them? Any thoughts?
Do you want to go first, Sebastien?
Yeah, I'll go first, right? So again, I think it ties back to a point that we just made, right? It's to lean in and engage. But I also realized that it's easy for me to say and harder, and sometimes much harder for others, in particular our women colleagues, to actually do it, right? And in my experience of sitting from my perspective, my sense is that first conversation of raising your hand, right? That tends to be the most challenging one, right? So the real question is, who is your ally? Like, who can you find in the organization to help you take that first step, right? Is it a peer? Is it somebody from outside of work? Is it a former manager, right? Somebody you can lean in and help you create that motion. So that first conversation is going to lead to all other conversations, right? And help you build that momentum to address your own needs and objectives.
That's great advice. Do you have any thoughts you wanted to add, Trudy?
Well, I'm trying to think about this, because whilst I'm comfortable that there's little or much less gender bias in the organization now, 24 years ago when I started as well, we didn't know each other 24 years ago, but Sebastien and I both started at the same time. There was a lot more, it was more prevalent, the gender bias. And I'm trying to think how I personally have dealt with it. And the answer is probably not a good one, because what I've always done is just put my head down, got on with my work, and hoped that my work spoke for itself. And, and that's how I've kind of got to where I am today. So I'm thinking that if I skip forward 24 years, what advice I would give to somebody a lot younger than me now. And I still think it's important to focus on delivering what you need to do, and not get too distracted or start going into victim mode, perhaps, if there's a gender bias. So you have to be careful about that. But I also think that, to Sebastien's point, you can proactively take steps. And I think the number one step is going back to advocating for yourself, promoting really some of the achievements and what you've done, and being vocal about it. And I think even small things like being in a large meeting and sitting there and not putting your point of view across because you're feeling a bit shy, or you're feeling that perhaps people won't take you seriously. I think that is really difficult, and I still find it difficult myself today. And I think that's something that we've really got to force ourselves to do, because only when your voice is heard can you really be taken seriously, and things just go from there.
All really good points. And that's something that we often hear is women need to find their voice. And sometimes it takes, years in a work environment, a work setting, to find your voice and to get comfortable voicing your thoughts and contributing to the conversation. This is a fantastic discussion, and you have both been with Citi for a really long time. Trudy, you've held roles in Dublin and New York before settling in London. Sebastien, you started in Paris before transferring to New York. If you were to go beyond gender, what are your thoughts on how to create an inclusive team culture? Trudy, do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, and this is something I really try and do myself with my own team, because I feel like the gender discussion is less critical now. When we talk about diversity now and inclusion, what I'm really trying to get to is, how do we make sure that we include all diverse thoughts, cultures, ways of doing, just ways of working even, into our business. So, the younger generation, they don't want to work 9 to 5. They don't want to work in the office. Even that is in a way an inclusion item, because we have to incorporate everyone. It doesn't mean that they don't have really great ideas that we should be listening to. So for me, it's a constant battle to make sure that I am being inclusive, and I'm sort of listening to practicing what I preach, in that if there are certain people in my team who are not speaking up in meetings, trying to find a safe way in which I can encourage them into the conversation so that they can find their voice. And again, I sort of go back to the point earlier, I don't think it's just about women. There's introverts in our male population as well, and we need to make sure that we're helping everyone find their voice.
That's all great points. Thanks for that. Sebastien, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think another important point here is that as part of creating an inclusive culture, you have to, especially as a leader, you have to collaborate with others to create forums, right, to invite people's participation where they feel comfortable sharing their experience, exchanging, thoughts, ideas, and at Citi, I think Citi does a very good job from that respect. I'll speak about my personal experience. I have the privilege of serving as a senior sponsor for the LGBTQ plus affinity group for TTS North America. And the purpose of this group is to create a space for members of the community and allies, again, to come together, right, and to organize themselves to raise awareness and give that confidence in people that they come in and join a broad organization and find a space where they can be themselves, right? And I think it's a constant education as leaders that we have to go through. Like, nothing is ever set when you think of inclusivity. It's always going to be the next engagement that you need to think of, right, to broaden the horizon and be a more efficient leader by being an example of inclusivity and awareness and inviting the broader population to participate as well.
Fantastic. All great thoughts. Thanks so much for your thoughts. Sebastien, Trudy, this has been a fabulous discussion, and I could listen to you both talk for hours. You're such great leaders and so inspiring. I'd like to close today's discussion by asking a question that I ask all of our Pause for Payments guests, and that is, if you were giving career advice to any of the rising stars in our audience, what would that be? And feel free to frame it within the context of today's discussion on breaking the bias. Sebastien, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to. So, if there was one piece of advice that I would give, is that to seek guidance from others in your organization, right? So obviously you want to learn on the job, you want to be good at it, you want to explore your own ability, skill set, your own interest, and direct your career accordingly. But as I think of managing your career and getting it to a point where you feel fulfilled, it's always very important to seek guidance from others, right? And because sometimes I found that the more junior members of the team feel like they have to figure it out all on their own, that it's their responsibility to do that. And that's a really, in my mind, sort of a hindrance to their own progress, right? Finding people to give you a different perspective, a broader perspective on what it means to manage a career, what it means to grow, what it means to acquire new skills. I think that's really crucial to one's development. And obviously the question is, who am I speaking? Who do I want to seek guidance to, right? And that becomes a factor of affinity, right? So we go back to the theme of today, right? And focusing on women and their own growth is, who do you want to reach out to help you with that exercise? So think about who in the organization around you are, that inspires respect, that impresses you, that you feel can be that mentor, and then proactively engage. Like people like Trudy and I we are really craving this type of interaction. That's part of the job. That's part of the fun of the job, is having those discussions, right? It's a very nice distraction from the grind, the day-to-day grind, right? So by all means, this is an open invitation to reach out.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Sebastien. Trudy, I'll give you the last word on this.
Oh, the pressure. Okay, so I've had a very singular career in one way, in that I've been at Citi for my entire career, but I have moved around in different roles and in different geographies. And I think that if I was giving a young rising star some advice, I would say that it has really enriched me and helped me working in different geographic locations, but also in different types of roles. And I went on a leadership course many years ago, and it said that you're at your most motivated when you're learning. And I think that's absolutely true. So if you begin to feel less motivated in your role, perhaps it's time to change slightly so that you're learning something new and you're becoming motivated again. And for me, what I found is that as I have held a few different roles, it helps me sort of walk in the shoes of others. So perhaps you can be a little bit more understanding of other people when you're working with them, if you've done a role similar to them as well. So I think it helps you, and it also helps the way you interact with other people.
Fantastic. I love how the theme of learning, lifelong learning, is threading through both of your responses, because we continue to grow as we learn, and we learn about geographies and how things are done in other countries and cultures and geographies, but also the cultural and the empathy that gives us is hugely, hugely important. Well, this has been a fabulous discussion. I could listen to you both all day, but I'd like to close now by thanking both of you for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insights on this important issue of bias in the workplace and how we can overcome it. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you both for your time and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Kristy. It was great.
You.
Awesome.
Bye.
And thank you to our audience today as we explore critical conversations around breaking the bias this month, International Women's Day, as we talk to our women and male allies all around the payments industry. Thank you.